Does the Bible have 66 books or 84 or 80 books? When I talk about this subject matter, I want to talk about the Apocrypha books. The Protestant Bible has 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. The Catholic version of the Bible has 80 books, an additional 14 books. These additional 14 books are the books that generate sometimes more heat than light. They are called Apocrypha books by the Protestants, while the Catholics call them the Deuterocanonical books. These books include books like Judith, Tobit, Esdras, the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, the first, second, third, and fourth Maccabees, Bel and the Dragon, Baruch, and other books. There are 14 books that are considered Apocrypha books or Deuterocanonical books. Now, let's look at these books very critically. These 14 books were written between 400 BC and 1 AD. These books were mostly written in Greek. Are these books part of the scripture? Or are these books completely heretical and useless in terms of Christian teachings and doctrine? This is what I will expound in this video. And I will give a short excerpt on what these books really discuss and then entail. I want to begin by saying that the Protestants have a very little regard to this book. The great Saint Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, and Jerome disagreed on these books. Whereas Augustine looked at these books a bit favorable and considered them to be part of the canon, Jerome had a denigrating view. He thought that these books were good for personal edification of the church, but they should not be considered canonical. That has been the view of the church ever since the first century, during the time of the Apostolic Fathers and thereafter. The Catholics have a high regard of these books, and the Council of Trent in the 1500 endorsed these books as part of the canons. That's why they are part of the Jerusalem Bible. But ever since the time of Augustine, these books were not considered canonical. They were considered good for edification, but they were not part of canon. The books that were considered authoritative in matters of Christian orthodoxy and praxis. Now, let's look at these books. Why do the Protestants have a dim view of these books? Number one, Jesus Christ and the New Testament writers did not quote any of these books. Number two, the Jewish canon contains only the 39 books that are part of the Protestant canons. So even the Jews did not consider these books as authoritative. Number three, sometimes they teach very strange doctrines, including the doctrine of purgatory, and even sometimes you'll find Tobit sometimes tacitly endorses things that are considered part of witchcraft and the use of those devices. Let me summarize the contents of these books that are known as deuterocanonical. When they say they are considered deuterocanonical by the Catholics, it means that these books' authority are not considered to be at par with the 66 books of the Bible. Number two, these books that are called Apocrypha, they have hidden meaning, and they are not considered authoritative per se. The teachings that they teach sometimes are considered heretical. That's why the Protestant thinks that these books ought to be removed and expunged from the Bible completely. Now, when you look at the book of Tobit, it tells the story of one of the people who was taken into captivity at the fall of Damascus in 722 BC. And this man, Tobit, was taken there. He prospered, but later he was relieved of his duties. He became blind, and his son was tasked to go to where he had deposited money, accompanied by Raphael, a traveling companion, who he later discovered is an angel. He was attacked by a ship. Raphael, the angel to be, rescued him, and he used the gill and the heart of the fish. And this man went and met another lady by the name of Susanna. This lady's subsequent 7 husbands had been killed by a demon, Desmond. The demon killed them on the night of the D-Day to the wedding. So the son of Tobit was able to slay the demon using the gill and the heart of these fish, and later the same device was used to cure the father, and the father tells them to run away from Nineveh. It's just a very good moral story. The history of it is spurious, and it cannot be substantiated per se. The book of Judith tells of a brave woman who cheats her way, brave woman who is Jewish, but it has some historical problems. It says Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Assyrian, and we know that is spurious because Tigla, those were the kings of the Assyrian, and Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. We find that this lady attacks, goes, tricks the commander, saves the children of Israel from an attack. This heroine, in fact, has been used to promote Mossad and such. But the historicity and the authenticity of this account is spurious. As we get the additional writings of Esther, the book of Esther does not mention God. But in these Apocryphas, we find that 50 times the additional writing of Esther mentions God 50 times. And you'll find the story about Mordecai and Esther could be myth and legends that are just caught in historical terms. The other of these writings is Baruch. Baruch, considered as the scribe of prophet Jeremiah, writes his writing in a mixture of poetry, but in a prose that is more prophetic, and he writes like a prophet. You'll find that this book, secondly, we have the letter of Jeremiah, and this red letter warns about idolatry, and it is directed to the children of Israel who are going through the temptation of seeking idolatry after the Babylonian exile. We get very interesting stories like the prayer of Azariah. This prayer, among the 3 young men of Hebrew, Azariah is the name of one of them. And his prayer is a prayer before they were thrown. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the furnace, the fiery furnace. And the prayer, and it exhorts the people to be focused on God despite the temptation, and it tells the legend of how an angel appeared with water, and he was able to protect Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The other book is about the Bell and the Dragon. The Bell and the Dragon tells the story of Daniel, the one that we know, and a lady who was caught in adultery. But somehow Daniel, when they were going to stone her because of adultery, because of accusing her falsely, she cried to God, and God sent Daniel, and he was able to interrogate the witness and discover the false plan, and the two men were stoned, and the lady was delivered. The other book among the Apocrypha the other book among the Apocrypha is The Wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach. It's like an imitation of the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It is a pseudonym. Somebody wrote as if he was Solomon, but it was not Solomon per se. Later, we get books like 4 books of Maccabees. The setting was around 165 BC. It tells of the rebellion of Maccabees against the Greek, and especially this notorious Greek ruler by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. The Seleucidians and the Ptolemies, and the Seleucidian leader Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrates the temple, and he goes and sacrifices a pig in the temple. Then Maccabees, Simon, and especially Maccabees Matthias, the hammer, goes and kills the Israelites who offered a pig, and the rebellion lasted, and the children of Israel were liberated from the Greeks. But finally, their short-lived independence was destroyed when the Romans came and they conquered Palestine. You'll find that first, second, third Maccabees talks about it. Judith, Tobit, the book of Esdras is another book, but I want to say the book of Tobit and Maccabees tactily endorses the prayer and veneration for the death and the paying of alms as compensation for their sin and changing their intermediate state of death. But as I conclude, what are some of the lessons that we can learn? The Anglican Church, on the issue of Apocryphas, says that these books could be beneficial, but they are not authoritative. Part of our lectionary lists some of the Apocryphas as part of the readings, but they are not considered to be authoritative. What about the Catholic? You'll find that these Apocrypha books firstly were recorded in the Septuagint, the Old Testament translation from Hebrew to Greek that was ordered by King Ptolemy of Egypt, and it was translated by 70 translators. That's why it's called the Septuagint LXX. By the legend has it that 72 translated differently, and when they compared, it was the same translation. And I want to say that since the Jews do not consider the Jews do not consider it as authoritative, and it's not part of the Hebrew Old Testament canon, I don't consider it authoritative. But they can be read for some personal motivation, some spiritual lessons, but they are not authoritative. Therefore, no doctrine should be formed on the basis of apocryphas. They are good for New Testament scholarship. They tell us the reality of that silent era. That is their beneficial. Most of them are pseudonyms. People wrote with names of potentially very influential and known Old Testament figures. Therefore, the other thing is that their historicity and authenticity cannot be verified. But there are some moral lessons that we can learn from them. But let's not form doctrines out of them. Lastly, as I conclude, it's good that you read. It gives us history and the background of the New Testament, but it is not authoritative. It is only the 66 books that are inspired, authoritative, and they are useful for teaching, correcting, rebuking, and training in righteousness. Therefore, this is a short excerpt. This is a panoramic view of the Apocryphas. Therefore, so that you will not you will not have a problem dealing with them. Books that were considered authoritative in the Bible, the 66 books, is they were written by either a prophet or an apostle. Number two, they contained messages that resonate in the entire Bible. Christ is their major theme. And number three, they were considered authoritative by the council. None of the ecumenical councils, either the Chalcedon or the Nicene Council, has ever considered them as authoritative. The spiritual verification of these books, the spiritual enlightenment of these books are not very clear. Therefore, I implore you as I conclude, read the 66 books to be the source of your doctrine, illumination, and direction. But the Apocryphas, you can read them for your enlightenment and for your moral lessons. Let's stick to the Bible. Let's preach the Bible. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. The 66 books, they are power to resurrection. They are power